So this section is going to be all about rules and liability that a coach needs to know about. So these are going to be FARs, BSRs, and state local DZ rules as well. So all of these rules are going to be found in Chapter 2 of the SIM. First up is the FARs, the Federal Aviation Regulations. So there's a few parts in here that do pertain to skydiving operations, but as a coach, you really should be familiar with Part 105 in particular, that talks about parachute operations. Next up, we have from USPA our BSRs, or Basic Safety Requirements. These are going to be things such as what can the ground winds be for students, what equipment do they need to wear, things like that. So you really want to pay attention to Section G as a coach, where they talk about student skydivers, but you should be familiar with all of them. They do change over time, sometimes a little bit reworded. Sometimes there's new ones. So if you have not read through the BSRs in the last 2 or 3 years, probably, I highly encourage you to go ahead and read through it again. Now, these BSRs are created for most common situations that are going to be encountered at a drop zone, but sometimes the particular circumstance at that drop zone may call for a waiver to these BSRs. And so if that is a possibility, it's actually going to be noted in Chapter 2 which of these BSRs may possibly be waiverable and who can approve such a waiver. Finally, we also have another group of possibly state rules. I think there's a few states that still have some laws about skydiving. You might have local rules. Your particular airport may have set some rules about skydiving happening on the airport. And then, of course, there's going to be DZ rules. So this might be things such as what helmet a student must wear, altimeter, where they're going to land, things like that. So if you are a person who is traveling to another DZ and maybe jumping with a student, or you just moved, make sure that you ask what the particular rules at that DZ are that you need to follow. So what happens if you break the law? And when I'm talking about the law, I'm talking about the FARs. So that could lead to fines and or jail time, depending on how egregious it is. Pretty sure that USPA is also going to want to investigate what happened if the FAA is investigating. If you're breaking the rules, this is either going to be BSRs or DZ rules. If you're breaking USPA rules, you're going to want to become familiar with the USPA governance manual. I know a lot of people are kind of shocked to find out that this even exists, but it does. Go to the download section on the USPA website and you'll be able to find the governance manual. And in particular, you're going to want to pay attention to section 1-6. Here they talk about how they would go about investigating any claims about you breaking BSRs, and then what the possible penalties are going to be. And this can range from getting your membership, your license, and or ratings. They can be suspended or revoked completely. If you're breaking DZ rules, you're probably going to hear about it from the SNTAs. And if you do it often enough, you may be asked no longer to jump at that particular DZ. This brings us to liability. What in the world is liability? So this paragraph here is taken completely from the IRM, and it says that liability goes hand in hand with responsibility. So if a person is responsible for an operation, that person is liable for any of the consequences that could happen when something goes wrong. Just as responsibility can be shared among people, so can liability. So the takeaway here, I think, is that if you had any responsibility with the jump when something goes wrong, then you may also be liable. And a lot of people then said, yeah, but all of these skydivers, and students, they've signed a liability waiver, which is true. The majority of drop zones now have liability waivers that need to be signed before anybody can make a jump. And a properly filled out waiver that does tend to discourage frivolous lawsuits. But if you've been in the skydiving world long enough, you're going to hear about some lawsuit that's being brought against some drop zones. So just because you have a waiver that was filled out does not mean that you're fully protected from a lawsuit. So I would like to finish this section by leaving you with this idea, that the best way to avoid a lawsuit is just to avoid an injury to begin with. So the next section that we're going to have is we're going to look at adult learners, some of the challenges that they face or challenges you will face when teaching them, and some strategies that you can use.